Hello folks, welcome to XJTV. I'm your host Seth Elwood. Today in the shop we are going to do a rear axle swap on our Project Warrior 1999 Jeep Cherokee XJ. What we've decided to do is the vehicle currently has a Dana 35 axle in there, and they are not known to be a strong axle when you start upgrading the size of the tires, as well as potentially wanting to tow anything with the vehicle or do any kind of trail riding that's more severe than what a regular vehicle could do. We wanted something that we could build to make it strong enough for our final tire size that we plan on using on this vehicle, which is going to be a 33-inch tire. But at the same time not break our bank and have to go with a large 1-ton type setup or something that wasn't out of the realm of the common man. What we came up with was a Chrysler 8.25. What we've done to the Chrysler 8.25 is we've gone ahead and bought what's called a master axle kit. Now there's two kind of kits out there that are available. There's a master axle kit and then there's a master pinion install kit. The master pinion install kit includes everything for the pinion itself, which is the center section. The master axle kit also includes the bearings and the seals out at the axle shafts at the edges of the tubing. And that's what we did. So every single axle bearing, inner and outer, as well as seal inner and outer, as well as the front, the crush sleeve, everything that you need to completely overhaul an axle is what we purchased. We then decided to do a rear disc brake swap. You can source the backing plates off of a 1996 through 1998 Jeep Grand Cherokee. You will have to separate the axles from the center section to get the backing plates off, but we've done that. That allows us to add rear disc brakes to our vehicle, which they didn't come with rear disc brakes, so now it will. While we were in there, we decided to go ahead and put a locker, because we do plan on doing some fairly moderate trail riding, and a locker is always a good thing to have, so we went with a Spartan locker. And to cap off the build, what we used is a rear differential cover. Now the rear differential cover that comes on these Jeeps is a real thin metal, not really good for trail riding. If you hang it or back into or roll backwards and hit a rock, it can easily be punctured. So I've seen folks out on the trail who have drug the rear axle over a rock and it actually peels back that thin metal differential cover, and all the fluid as a consequence will leak out of it. So we've contacted Solid Axle, and they came on board for the build and provided us a rear differential cover. So stay tuned, we're going to go check out that rear axle before we get it installed in the Jeep. Alright folks, here she is, the rear axle. Now like I said before, this is a Chrysler 8.25. Now the rotors, the pads, as well as the calipers and the backing plates are all off of a 1996 through 1998 Jeep Grand Cherokee. They bolt up just like the drum brake backing plate does. Inside here, like I said before, we've got a Spartan locker, and this is the solid differential cover. So the first thing we're going to need to do to the Jeep to get this axle installed is jack it up and take off the rear tires. So we'll go ahead and get to that. Stay tuned. Alright, another thing that you're going to need to take note of is the brake lines. Now I'm using the brake lines off the Chrysler 8.25 for the hard line, and then for the soft line I'm actually using the XJ. That way if I ever need to do a rear brake job on this thing, I still have the ability to move the caliper out of the way and not bend the lines. Now you see how I've had to reroute the lines a little bit. Now these lines were never intended to work with a caliper type setup, so we've had to bend them a little bit, and make sure you're really careful when you do that because you don't want to pinch the line. But the way I've got them orientated on here, they're not going to be any danger of getting hung up on anything, nor are they going to be in the way of the emergency brake cable or any other operation of the rear of the vehicle. So just a quick note on that. Now the next thing we're going to want to do is get up underneath the vehicle. So stay with me. Okay, now that we're under the vehicle, the next step is to remove the caps off of the rear axle for where the axle and the rear yoke come together. These are CV caps, or U-joint caps, union joint caps. They are 5/16. There's 4 of them. A tip to easily get these removed is put a little bit of penetrating oil on them before you go cranking off of them. It'll make it a little bit easier to get them off. Also, another thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be disconnecting the flexible brake line that goes from the main hard line to the rear axle. It's a block, so we're actually going to be taking the hard lines loose from this block, and then on top of the block is where the breather tube is for the axle, and we're going to remove that as well. Stick with us. Okay, now that we've got the brake lines off, we've got the emergency brake cables off. This vehicle was equipped with ABS. That's one of the things that I'm not going to be retaining. Went ahead and removed the ABS sensors. And now we are moving on to removing the shocks and the U-bolts. Now the first thing I'm going to remove are the shocks. It takes an 18mm. Once I get both the shocks off both sides, I'm going to put the jack up underneath the axle, and then I'm going to remove the actual U-bolts that hold the axle to the leaf spring. At that point in time, the axle will be free and okay to slide out the back. We will continue at that point in time, so stick with us. Alright, there she is, folks. Dana 35 out. Simple as that. Doing it on the garage floor with an electric impact wrench and hand tools. It's not that hard. Now let's focus our attention on this one. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and put fluid in it, because I do not have a pump to pump the fluid up inside of it. It's been sitting for weeks now with the urethane curing in between the axle housing and the solid diff cover. It's just a matter of getting the fluid in it and sliding it up underneath and reversing the process of putting it on. So stick with us and we'll get back to it. Alright, there you have it. Now we've went ahead and put a couple thousand miles on this rear axle swap before I shot this last video, just in case there were any issues or any problems. And we've only ran into one slight issue. See the disc brakes in there. Now the only issue that we ran into was if you fill this axle till the fluid goes out the drain plug, the fluid level is going to be too high for inside the axle. If you look at where the drain plug is in relation to where the axle tubes are, it's sitting a little bit above those axle tubes. So we put about 4 quarts of fluid in there, and we had just a little bit come out of the vent tube. And what will happen is, and it will mainly take place when you go on the freeway, when the pressure builds up inside the axle from the axle spinning, it'll push the fluid out, and it'll run up the vent tube, and the fluid, and you can actually see where it's a little bit wet there, will be leaking out of these 2 holes. Some of it will run down and come out of this hole as well. So if you take yours out and you drive it and you notice that fluid leakage, that's where it's coming from. So just be cautious that you don't overfill the axle, and you should be okay. There you have it, folks. That's how you swap a Chrysler 8.25 out of a Jeep that currently had a D35, and we installed a locker, a solid diff cover. We did a rear disc brake conversion. Now I've put a few miles on it since the swap. I've put about 1,000 miles on it since the swap, and so far so good. Had no problems. I can tell you that Spartan locker is fairly quiet for a locker. A lot of those lunchbox style lockers that you get will make a lot of racket. But that one seems to be fairly quiet. Now you're going to know it's back there. When you're backing up and turning, or you're going around a sharp turn, you're going to hear it ratcheting, click, 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 click. And sometimes when I'm driving about 45-50 miles an hour and I let off the throttle, it'll make a humming noise. That's normal operation of a locker. They're not quiet by any stretch of the imagination. but it's still drivable and it's still a decent product. So just wanted to thank you for watching.